أعوذ بالله من الشيطان الرجيم بسم الله الرحمن الرحيم وصلى الله على محمد وآل بيته الطيبين الطاهرين المعصومين. Dear brothers and sisters, in this session I am going to explain the remaining rules regarding burial, regarding a dead body, and as you know very well, there are certain recommended actions, certain rules that need to be understood and followed and practiced when you are going to bury someone or when you want to perform the rituals, the necessary rituals. It's very clear that when a dead body who belongs to a Muslim and not Muslim, a non-Muslim, because it's essentially and basically forbidden to wash the body of a non-Muslim and to even pray on its dead body and also do the other rituals. It's forbidden. But when it comes to a Muslim's body, of course, it's necessary that all the necessary rituals must be performed, including washing the ghusl and shrouding and then finally burying the dead body. When a dead body has been shrouded, it's necessary that the dead body be buried in a place which is not usurped, which is clean and which is respectful, of course. The dead body should be lowered with its head into the graveyard, and of course the person who buries or who carries the body into the graveyard should be barefooted, and he should not be wearing anything. But of course it's not necessary to be barefooted and to be bareheaded. It has been said that it is recommended that this should be done, of course. And it has also been said that the person who, for example, buries a woman, and if he is a man, it is necessary that he should be mahram. He should be a close relative of the dead body. In the absence of a mahram, then of course the dead body can be buried by a non-mahram individual, because there is no way, there is no other alternative. And when the dead body is put inside the grave, of course the dead body has to be put inside the grave with on its right side, because it cannot be put with its back on the ground, but with its right side on the ground. And there is of course a kind of cloth which is called khillati, and which is very popular in the Middle East, especially among Shia Muslims. It is an extra piece of clothing with verses from the Holy Quran and riwayat, or maybe zikr and du'as, supplications written on that piece of cloth. The grand religious authorities have not rejected the permissibility of using this extra piece of cloth, or they have not forbidden the use of khil'ati. They have not neither rejected nor even advised people to use this kind of khil'ati. Of course, some people do believe that khil'ati is very necessary, and that especially those people who are at an old age, they consider it very important for themselves to buy a khil'ati and to have it with them, and to be prepared for death. Of course, preparation for death is important. It is necessary. But a piece of cloth with written dua and written verses on it will not serve a purpose if a person's deeds are not good, if a person's actions, amal, are not good. So I don't want actually to deny the fact that it might have some impact. It might have, but this is not a necessary or a recommended part of the ritual. Once the dead body has been buried and the dead body has been wrapped with this piece of cloth, then of course the grave has to be covered with stones, and so that when the dust is poured onto into the grave, and the kafan or the shroud is not made dirty with wet dust or with anything from outside the grave. The dead body has to be lower. The graveyard has to be dug deep enough so that the smell of the dead body does not come out. The deeper, of course, the grave, the better it is. But it should not be so that the graveyard should not be so shallow that it is feared that some beasts, some animals might discover the grave and dig it up and then steal the dead body or eat it up even. So it should be dug deep down enough that the dead body is not pulled out by animals, and the smell of the decaying body does not spread around. And once, of course, the dust is poured into the grave, it is necessary for mu'minin to gather on the grave and to recite Fatiha. It's not, of course, wajib, but it is recommended for mu'minin and for believers to gather on the graveyard and to pray on the grave for the dead body, and say that, for example, if the dead body belongs to a man, then it's recommended, and it has been said that if 40 mu'minin, 40 believers witness, testify that the dead body or that person has been a good person and that he does not know anything bad about the dead person, then Allah Ta'ala, Allah the Almighty, the Exalted, will forgive that person, irrespective of whether that person is a woman or a man. But the way you are going to offer the prayer, the dua, that is important. Of course, if the dead body belongs to a man, then it's good to recite Allahumma inna la na'lamu minhu illa khayra wa anta a'lamu bihi minna. That is a prayer which you recite for a male dead body. But if the dead body belongs to a female, then of course you can say Allahumma inna la na'lamu minha illa khayra wa anta a'lamu biha minna. This means that the meaning of this dua is this, that, oh Allah, we do not know anything bad or anything wrong about this dead body. We testify that he is a good person, and you, of course, you know the best. You know the best, and this is a kind of testification, a kind of bearing testimony to a person being good. It is recommended that 40 mu'min, 40 believers testify to the goodness and to the good deeds of a believer. Dear brothers and sisters, it is not permissible to bury the dead body of a Muslim and the non-Muslim's graveyard. Nor is it permissible to bury the dead body of a non-Muslim in a Muslim graveyard. Muslims and non-Muslims should be buried in their own respective graveyards. It is disrespectful to bury the dead body of a Muslim in a non-Muslim graveyard. This is one thing. Another thing is that it is not permissible to bury the dead body of a Muslim in a bad place, in a dirty place. For example, there is a place which is where the garbage is collected, where the garbage of the city is collected. It is not permissible to dig in a graveyard and bury the dead body of a Muslim in it. So the place where the dead body of a Muslim is buried, it should be clean, it should be respectful, it should be a place reserved for Muslims, not for any other purposes like for garbage or for anything which looks and which seems to be disrespectful in the eye of people, in the eye of Sharia. Of course, it's not permissible to dig up a grave for the purpose of burying another dead body into that grave. For example, there is a grave and there is already the dead body of a Muslim in it. So, and it has not decayed, the dead body has not disintegrated. It's not permissible under any circumstances to dig up that grave, to open that grave and bury another person inside that grave. Of course, if for example there are three dead bodies and those three dead bodies are buried in a single grave, it's permissible in the sense that the grave will be dug deep and there will be stories inside the grave. There will be one story, second story and third story, because in some cities, of course, in some cities which are very much populated and there is very little space in the graveyard for more dead people, and due to lack of capacity, due to lack of room for more dead bodies, then the graves are dug in three stories. The first is buried and the lowest story, then another, and then a third dead body is buried in the same graveyard, in the same place. There is no problem as far as the fatwa of the ground religious authorities is concerned. The Maraji have not objected to this, they have allowed it. And of course, we do receive a lot of questions regarding women visiting graveyard. This is also a question concerning a dead body. Now, of course, every rule that has something to do with burying a dead body, with visiting graveyards and praying on the graveyards has to be said and has to be explained in this session. Of course, we are sometimes, when I visit the official websites of the ground religious authorities, I do see a lot of questions concerning women visiting the graveyards. Is it permissible for women, for ladies, for girls to visit the graveyards? Of course, it is permissible. The ground religious authorities have allowed women. Islam has allowed, and Muslim and religious scholars, as the jurisprudence, as the experts in Islamic studies, allow women to visit graves and visit graveyards and visit their relatives' graves. It's only in a Sunni culture and a Sunni religion that women are not allowed. Women are not allowed to accompany the dead bodies. We are not allowed to go to the graveyards. Women are not allowed to visit the shrines and the tombs, and we have to differentiate between Sunnis and Shias because certain rules are allowed. There are certain norms and practices in Shia which are allowed, and certain norms and practices which are not allowed in the Sunni community or in the Sunni religion. Some Shias, being under the influence of a Sunni culture, because they are living in a predominantly Sunni community, they are under the influence of a Sunni culture, thinking that women are not allowed to go to the graveyards, so they do not take their ladies, their women to the graveyards. They think that women should not go, while it is permissible for women to go, to offer prayers, to say dua, and to visit the graves of their dear and near. This is one thing. Once a dead body is buried, it has always been recommended that, of course, a certain prayer which is called namaz wahshat or wahshat prayer, wahshat salat wahshat, be offered on the first night after the burial ceremony. And what is the procedure of namaz wahshat? Of course, many of you know how to offer the wahshat prayer. The wahshat prayer consists of two rakats. And the first rakat, you will recite after takbiratul ihram, and after niyat, of course, you will recite hamd. After hamd, you will recite ayatul kursi only once. You will recite ayatul kursi only once. You do the ruku and then the sujood, and again you stand up for the second rakat. How do you offer the second rakat? The second rakat is that you recite hamd, and then after hamd you will recite Surah Inna Anzalna 10 times. And of course, in between, each time you recite the surah, there is no ruku. Of course, just like namaz ayat, there is no ruku. You are not going to bend down and stand up after each surah is recited. Once you recite the surah, and then again you will start again reciting the surah Inna Anzalna. You have to recite it 10 times, and then of course if you would like to say a qunut is allowed, and especially in recommended prayers, qunut and such other du'as are allowed. And whenever you doubt in a mustahab prayer, you should remember that all doubts in mustahab prayer are permissible or allowed, and you are not supposed to do any action and to recite a prayer again or to act according to the rules which are specific to the obligatory prayers. Doubts in the obligatory prayers should be ignored, and they should not be taken into account. The doubts do not invalidate the recommended prayers. Now, after reciting the Surah An-Anzalna 10 times, you will recite the Qunut, and then you will do the Ruku and Sujood. You will at the end say the Taslim, Salam. Of course, once you have completed the prayer, then you will recite what? You will recite Allahumma salli ala Muhammad wa ali Muhammad wab'ath thawabaha ila qabri falan. Instead of Fulan, you will recite the name of that person. Instead of course, when you refer to the Risala of the grand religious authorities, they have left a blank space after this dua, Allahumma salli ala Muhammad wa ali Muhammad wa ab'as sawabaha ila qabr. And then there is a blank space. Instead of the blank space, you will recite the name of that dead body. For example, if the name of that dead body is Ali, you will recite Allahumma salli ala Muhammad wa ali Muhammad wa ab'as sawabaha ila qabri Ali. Ali binni Fulan, son of Fulan, son of a certain individual. Then the prayer is over and you, inshallah, will gain the sawab. Every prayer that you recite, you should recite it with the intention of seeking proximity to God and with the intention of qurbat. And one thing more that has to be taken into consideration is that the mustahab prayers should not be offered in congregation. They should be offered individually. It is haram according to religious authorities to offer, for example, the nawafil prayer, the nafila prayers in jama'at, in congregation. You have to offer them individually and separately without jama'ah, because it's a kind of innovation, bid'ah, to offer the nawafil in jama'ah. Wahshat prayer is a recommended prayer, and it cannot be offered in jama'at, and you cannot make the niyat of jama'at. You know that on the night of Ramadan the Shias as well as the Sunnis they have to recite, for example, 1,000 rakats of prayers, and of course they call those 1,000 rakats of prayer Taraweeh, Namaz, Salat Taraweeh, or the Taraweeh prayer. But we don't use this term, the Taraweeh, in our books. We say the mustahab prayers. Now those mustahab prayers cannot be offered under any circumstances in Jama'at prayer. But the Sunni community, offer the same prayers in Jama'at prayer, and that is a kind of innovation, a kind of bid'ah. And of course, it was the second caliph who created and who made that innovation, because it's said that one day he entered a mosque and saw people standing in different places of the mosque offering the nawafil, the mustahab prayers. Then he thinking that it was good for the mu'mineen to offer the mustahab prayers, he gathered all the mu'mineen and the Muslims in the mosque and ordered them to offer the Taraweeh prayer, the recommended prayers in Jama'ah, and that is a kind of innovation or bid'ah. Now, having said that, there is nothing more to say about Namaz al-Wahshat. Namaz al-Wahshat is, of course, recommended. It should be offered on the first night after the dead body is buried. You can offer it after the Maghrib prayer or after Isha prayer, and it does not make any difference. But you cannot, for example, if a person dies and he has not been buried, you cannot offer that prayer before the dead body, because of certain reasons. For example, maybe certain legal reasons, the dead body is not buried, so you cannot offer the prayer. Or maybe the dead body is transferred to some other towns or some other places, in which case you cannot offer the prayers until you know for sure that the dead body in the other city has been buried. And you can defer the prayers, you can delay the prayers until the dead body has been buried in that town. Dear brothers and sisters, it's not permissible to exhume, to dig up the grave of a mu'min under any circumstances. But there are some exceptions. There are some exceptions that need to be taken into account and need to be understood. What are those exceptions? If the dead body of a Muslim has been buried in a usurped piece of land, it's necessary that the dead body should be brought out. The grave has to be exhumed, and it should be buried in another place, in a place which is not usurped. That is one thing. If, for example, there is a legal or a criminal investigation, and the dead body has to be pulled out in order to make sure maybe the cause of the death, or in order to clarify the cause of the death, or the crime has to be ascertained, in which case the dead body can be brought out and there would be no problem in it. Also, if something has been buried along with the dead body, for example, a piece of ring, maybe a gold ring, or a piece of costly cloth or dress or something like that has been buried, and the heirs do not consent that that object be buried with the dead body, in that case, of course, it is permissible to exhume the grave, to pull out the dead body, or to pull out that special object which has been buried along with the dead body. Digging up or destroying the graves of the descendants of the imams, the martyrs, the ulama, the grand religious authorities, the respected people, is haram, and it is not permissible under any circumstances and in any Islamic culture to dig up the graves of the companions of the Holy Prophet, the scholars, the imams, to destroy their shrines, or to disrespect them or to insult them under any circumstances. Of course, such acts, such crime actions are taking place in some countries, unfortunately, and those who claim themselves to be Muslims are not real Muslims, because they are disrespecting the graves of the noble family and then the holy imams, and they are disrespecting their descendants, they are disrespecting the scholars. And any action, of course, which is considered disrespectful, which is considered desecrating, is not. But of course, digging up the graves of an ordinary person and a normal person is allowed. And if the dead body has decayed and there's only the bone and the flesh is not there, it's permissible to dig up the grave and even reuse the grave. For example, in some cities you can see that there is no room, no space for more dead bodies to be buried. And of course, the old graves, which do not belong to the scholars, to prominent, to religious authorities, can be dug up, and other dead bodies can be buried inside them, provided that the dead bodies should have decayed and there should not be any, should have disintegrated, not decayed, should have disintegrated, and there is no problem in doing so. I should tell you that digging up the graves in a brief, in a short account, I should say that the digging up graves is allowed, and in certain cases, like for example, as I said, if it's buried in a user place, it's allowed, or when the kafan, the shroud of the dead body, has been purchased with haram source, or it comes from a haram source, or it has been usurped. In this case, it's permissible to dig up the grave and change the shroud, of course. And when opening the grave, it does not amount to disrespect of the dead person, and if it transpires, of course, that he was buried without ghusl or kafan, in this case, again, it is allowed, it is permissible to pull out the dead body and to give the kafan and ghusl to that dead body. And of course, it's allowed to dig up the grave when it is necessary to inspect the body of the dead person to establish a right, which is more important than exhumation. Establishing a right, it is permissible. And of course, it's allowed to dig up a grave when the grave is opened up for a legal purpose, as I mentioned, or it's allowed to dig up a grave when it's feared that a wild beast would tear up the corpse, or it will be carried away by flood or exhumed by the enemy, and in this case also it's allowed. And it's allowed to dig up the grave of someone when the deceased has willed that his body be transferred to sacred places. We have seen in our lifetime many people being buried, for example, in a certain graveyard, but due to certain exigencies, due to certain constraints, the dead body has not been transferred to another place. Then, of course, it can be transferred, carried away to the place in which the will has stated. Inshallah, in the next session, I will embark on explaining the rules, some other topics, inshallah. Until then, wassalamu alaikum wa rahmatullahi wa barakatuh.